Callum Reed stood beneath the wooden porch, holding an empty tin cup in his hand, gazing out at the blazing golden horizon. For the past 3 years, he had spoken only to horses and the wind. Every single day was the same. Wake up, fix the fence, feed the livestock, then quietly watch the sun fade away. That evening, 2 riders appeared. From afar, their silhouettes grew larger, taller than any man he had ever seen. When they stopped at the edge of the porch, Callum finally saw they were 2 Apache women, sculpted with muscle, their sun-kissed bronze skin glowing, broad-shouldered, long black hair dancing in the wind. The older one, her eyes calm and steady, spoke with a raspy but clear voice. "We have come for a reason." The other, younger, her gaze burning. "We need children. Our bloodline is fading. We need a man with a heart, not one who loves to fight." Callum was stunned into silence. He set the cup down on the table, his voice shaking and rough. "Are you serious?" The older sister stepped forward, half a head taller than him, her eyes as deep as mountain stone. "We are. We chose you because you know how to listen to the land." The wind howled through the porch rafters. The 2 horses pawed the ground, the scent of dust mixing with sweat. Callum looked at them, unsure whether to be afraid, to run, or simply to bow his head before the 2 fierce spirits standing in the red twilight. From that moment on, his barren land began to change color. They did not leave. Right after that evening, the 2 sisters set up a leather tent near the wooden fence, right by the dry creek bed. The wind howled every night, making the tent creak like ancient drums. Callum did not dare ask any questions. He only knew that each morning, when he opened his eyes, they were there standing silently by the well, their eyes watching his every move. On the first day, Callum led a horse down to the creek, scrubbing a wound on its leg. The younger one, Awana, stood with arms crossed, watching him from a distance. When the horse jerked, Callum did not strike it. He simply said in a gentle voice, "It is all right, calm down." His voice was strangely tender. Awana frowned. She had never seen a man speak to an animal the way one might to a friend. On the second day, he went to the field. The earth was dry as ash, cracked wide open. He bent down, planting seeds one by one, then poured the last bits of water from a pail over them. Tala, the older sister, quietly approached, her hand tough as wood resting on the ground. "The land is dead. Nothing will grow." Callum smiled without looking up. Even the dead need someone to believe they can live again. Tala stood still. His words were as quiet as the wind, yet they stirred something deep in her chest. On the 3rd day, Awana saw him repairing the fence that the wind had knocked over. Every hammer strike was slow, steady, and patient. She walked up and asked, "Are you not afraid of us?" "I am," he replied, still driving nails into wood. "But fear does not help me rebuild anything." Awana let out a soft laugh, the first laugh since they arrived. On the 4th day, Tala saw him leave a bowl of water outside their tent. That was all. He said nothing. She looked at the bowl, sunlight shimmering across the surface like glass. A small gesture, but in a land so full of hostility, it meant more than 1,000 promises. On the 5th day, the morning was bright with sunshine. Awana sat on the fence, watching Callum as he pulled the plow. Sweat soaked through his back, but he never complained. The wind blew, dust clung to his hair, and in that moment, she understood. This man fought every single day, just not with guns. That afternoon, Tala said to her sister, "He is not strong like a warrior, but he is strong in another way." Awana nodded. "Maybe. This is what Mother once dreamed of." As night fell, the 2 tall figures sat beside the fire. Wind wove through their hair, smoke mingled with sweat and sand. They no longer looked at Callum as prey, but as a small flame still burning in a land where all hope had turned to ash. On the 6th morning, the sun rose red as blood. From the direction of the mountains, 3 riders approached on horseback, kicking up dust that blurred the horizon. Tala recognized them from afar, 3 elders of the tribe. The ruler, the keeper of the law, and their aunt, by blood. All 3 wore painted leather robes, with white bone rings on their shoulders, symbols of judgment. When they stopped in front of the wooden fence, Callum was feeding the cattle. He looked up and froze when he saw the cold, stone-like eyes staring back at him. Awana stepped in front of him, placing a hand gently on her sister's shoulder. "They have come for us." The eldest elder, hair silver like mist, voice booming like a drum, spoke. "We have heard that 2 Apache warrior women want to bear the child of a weak white man. Is it true?" Tala did not flinch. She answered slowly, each word clear. "Yes, he is not strong in war, but strong in spirit." Another elder let out a dry laugh. "Spirit does not feed children. Spirit does not stop spears." Their aunt, the one who had taught them how to ride, stepped forward. Her eyes were a storm of anger and sorrow. "Tala, have you forgotten your blood? Our ancestors did not sow seeds in men who bow their heads." Callum took a step back, feeling like he should not be hearing this. But Awana turned to him, her voice low but unwavering. "Some bow their heads out of fear, others bow to plant a seed." Her words silenced the air. Only the wind hissed through the fence. The eldest elder looked Callum up and down, then asked, "What do you have besides those calloused hands?" Callum stood quiet for a long moment, then replied, "I have nothing. Only the will to work, and a promise never to raise my hand against a woman." The 3 elders exchanged glances. A flicker of confusion passed through their eyes. Tala stepped forward, her large hand resting on his shoulder, as if to confirm, "That is exactly what we need." Their aunt tightened the reins, her voice deep. "You choose this path. I will not stop you. But the desert wind does not shelter the weak. If he falls, do not weep." With that, they turned their horses and rode off into the red dust. That evening, Callum stood still, watching the trail of dust fade from the sky. The 2 towering women remained, but the look in their eyes was no longer a challenge, it was a promise. Beneath the dry earth, another seed had been planted, not with water, but with the belief that true strength can take the shape of gentleness. That afternoon, the sky darkened like a blanket of ash draped over the valley. Clouds curled like beasts. Thunder and lightning tore across the heavens, heralding a storm unlike any they had ever seen. Callum was gathering firewood when he heard Tala shout, "The storm is coming! Lock up the barn!" He sprinted, the wind slashing at his face, the smell of dust and electricity burning his lungs. The livestock cried out in panic. The roofing boards rattled and groaned. When the first crack of thunder struck, the rain poured down in sheets. A wide tear in the porch roof let water pour straight onto the dining table, soaking the map and the old photograph of his father. Callum looked up, rain lashing his face, and whispered, "If I do not fix this, the whole house will rot." Tala stepped forward, voice firm, "Do not be foolish. In this wind, climbing up there is a death sentence." Awana held the door tight, her hair soaked, shouting through the storm, "No one is forcing you." But Callum had already tied a rope around his waist and was climbing the shaking ladder. The wind howled through the cracks in the shingles. Rain whipped like lashes. Each step he took made the ladder tremble as if it might snap. His hands shook, frozen to the bone, but he held the hammer, driving nails with the last of his strength. Below him, Tala gripped the ladder tight. Awana stood with arms wide, ready to catch. A flash of lightning lit the scene, the 3 of them caught in the fury of nature. A small man, bracing himself against the storm. 2 towering women, shielding him from the wind. Tala shouted through the rain, "Are you afraid?" Callum answered, breath ragged, "Of course I am, but fear won't keep this roof dry." He drove in the final nail and collapsed, shoulders trembling, water pouring off him. Awana caught him just in time, her large hand wrapping around his back, strangely warm in the freezing cold. The 3 of them sat down, breathing hard, staring at the roof now holding firm. Tala looked at him, her eyes completely changed. "You are not strong, but you do not give up. Even the wind respects a man like that." Callum said nothing. He simply smiled, exhausted. Eyes on the roof, slowly drying. In the sound of falling rain, Awana whispered, as if to herself, "Maybe this is the kind of strength the land has been waiting for." Outside, the storm kept roaring, but inside that small house, a new kind of faith had taken root, sturdier than wood and nails. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, consider subscribing to my channel, so that each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you one more tale from the West. 3 days after the storm, the valley dried once again. The cracked earth still held the scent of dampness, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh grass. Callum was tying up a section of the fence when he heard the sound of hooves in the distance. Tala looked up, her voice low. "He is here." From the horizon, Dakota appeared. A young warrior, shoulders broad as wooden pillars, bare chest painted red, a bow and dagger slung across his back. With every step his horse took, dust rose like smoke and fire. When he stopped at the gate, his gaze was as cold as a blade drawn from its sheath. "This weak man," Dakota said, pointing straight at Callum, "has stolen our bloodline. I am here to see if he deserves it." Callum did not respond. He simply set his hammer down and wiped the sweat from his brow. Tala stepped forward to intervene, but Callum shook his head gently. "It is all right." Awana moved closer, her voice sharp. "Dakota, this is not a battlefield." But he only smirked. Where there is honor, every place is a battlefield. Before anyone could stop him, his fist came flying. A blow fast as lightning landed on Callum's cheek. He staggered, blood at the corner of his mouth, but did not fall. Tala screamed, "Enough!" But Dakota stood still, staring at the wiry man now wiping blood with his sleeve. Callum looked up. His eyes held no hatred, no challenge, only a calmness that seemed to still the wind. His voice was hoarse but steady. "If I am weak, why do you need to prove it?" The question made Dakota freeze. His fist clenched, then relaxed. He exhaled hard. A moment later he nodded slowly. "There is no need for another blow. You have already won." Tala and Awana stood in silence. In that moment, there were no victors, no defeated, only men and women of a harsh land, learning that strength is not always in muscle. Dakota mounted his horse and said quietly to the sisters, "If the tribe asks, I will say he is worthy." Then he turned and rode off, his horse kicking red dust into the sky. As evening fell, Callum sat on the porch steps, his cheek still swollen, a cup of cold water in hand. Awana sat beside him, eyeing the dried blood on his chin. She asked softly, "Why did you not fight back?" He smiled. "I do not want our child to grow up thinking violence is how one earns respect." Tala stayed silent for a long time, then gave a slow nod. "And that is why you are stronger than all of them." Outside, the sun set, casting a red glow across the fields. In that light, the image of 3 souls, 1 man, 2 towering warrior women seemed etched into the earth. A new West was being born not through sword or spear, but through the quiet courage of gentleness. That evening, the sunset burned bright, like the last flame of the day. The wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of wet grass and wood smoke. Callum sat on the porch, wrapping the wound on his cheek. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not from pain, but from disbelief at all that had just happened. Tala stepped out of the house, a woven blanket draped over her shoulder, still warm from the fire. Awana followed behind, hair damp with dew, her eyes glowing like the fading Sunday. Both of them stopped in front of Callum. No one spoke. Only the sound of insects filled the air, weaving between gusts of wind passing through the newly patched roof tiles. It was Awana who spoke first, her voice low and husky, no longer sharp like before. "You stood firm when the storm came, and when the punch came. You did not strike back, and you did not bow. That is something the tribe has never seen in a man." Callum looked at them, the firelight reflected in his eyes. "I only did what I believed was right." Tala nodded gently, then sat beside him, her broad shoulders blocking half the setting Sunday. "A man who can repair a roof in the middle of a storm, who can take a punch without returning one, that man deserves to be trusted. And if the land needs a strong seed, we wish to plant it with you." Callum was silent for a long time. His heart pounded, not with desire, but with something sacred blooming in his chest. He asked softly, his voice trembling, "Do you truly want that?" Awana stepped closer, a faint smile on her lips. "We no longer want. We choose." In that moment, there was no need for ceremony, no need for witnesses. Only the sunset, the wind, and 3 tired souls who had found one another on barren ground. Callum stood, looking at the 2 tall women waiting in the red light of dusk. He spoke slowly, clearly, voice rough but certain. "I say yes." There was no cheer, no music. Only the soft smiles of 2 warrior women, light as breath. Tala gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "From now on, This house belongs to the three of us. Every stone, every seed, will carry the same name. 7 weeks later, the corn bloomed gold. In the small house on the prairie, morning light streamed through the window, casting a glow over simple things and the quiet breath of new life arriving. Awana smiled, her hand resting on her belly. She whispered, "Maybe the wind heard our prayer." Callum replied, his voice raspy but tender, "No. Maybe the land did." Outside, the prairie had turned green again after the long dry season, and beneath that earth, something new was beginning sprouting from three souls who thought they were lost, but found each other through trust and kindness. Early in the morning, mist still blanketed the fields. The wind whispered gently through young corn, just beginning to seed. Callum was starting the fire when Tala stepped out of the house. She placed a soft hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "Someone is coming." From afar, 3 riders approached at a slow pace. This time, there were no swords, no shouting, only the soft jingle of reins and the faint scent of smoke in the breeze. Awana recognized them instantly, the 3 elders. Their aunt led the way, still wearing the same painted leather coat, but her face no longer held the hardness it once did. When they arrived, she dismounted and looked around the small wooden house, the green cornfield, the cattle grazing in peace. There were no signs of violence or chaos, only the quiet breath of real life. Callum stood up and greeted them with a raised hand, his voice low. "Welcome. I did not think we would meet again." She did not answer right away. Instead, she walked slowly toward Awana and let her gaze settle on her belly, where new life was beginning to grow. A long silence followed. Then, from a leather pouch, she pulled out an old silver bracelet, worn and faded, etched with the symbols of wind and Sunday. "Our grandmother's bracelet," she said, voice deep and gravelly, "passed down through generations only to the one through whom the bloodline will continue. Today, I give it to you." Awana stood frozen, eyes glistening. Tala knelt, her head bowed. The elder turned to Callum, studied him for a long moment, then spoke softly. "I once called you weak. But the weak do not make 2 Apache warrior women lay down their spears. The weak do not grow corn in dry soil." She took the bracelet, stepped forward, and slid it onto Callum's wrist. Her hand trembled, but her gaze was steady as stone. "From this day, you are no longer an outsider. Learn our language, so this child may grow hearing 2 voices, the voice of the land and the voice of the wind." Callum bowed his head, voice tight with emotion. "I will learn, I promise." The entire valley seemed to pause. A breeze drifted through the corn, the rustling leaves whispering their blessing. The old woman gently touched Awana's belly, then smiled. "The blood of warriors, and the heart of one who loves that, is the strongest bloodline of all." The 3 elders turned their horses and rode off without another word. Callum stood watching, his hand closed tightly around the silver bracelet glinting in the morning Sunday. Behind him, Tala said softly, "They saw what we have known all along." Awana rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "We are no longer alone." The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the roof, the fields, and the 3 of them standing side by side. And across the wind-swept plains, a new bloodline born of 2 worlds had been accepted as if it were a blessing from the earth itself. That spring came earlier than usual. White clouds drifted across a pale blue sky, and the cornfield in front of the house had already grown waist-high. For the first time, the sound of a baby's cry echoed through the dry valley inside the small wooden house where once only wind and loneliness lived. Awana gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The boy had his mother's deep brown eyes, and the girl wore Callum's gentle smile. Tala cradled the newborn in her arms, her gaze softer than ever. "The land has answered our prayers," she said. Callum sat beside her, gently touching the baby's forehead, his voice thick with emotion but warm. "And the wind brought them exactly when we needed them most." News of the biracial twins spread across the region. First came curiosity, then silence, and finally visits. Apache travelers paused to drink at the well. White settlers on the trail stopped to ask for a place to rest. No one asked who they were anymore. No one argued about skin or blood. On the front door, Tala hung a wooden sign, carved in both languages, "House of the Wind, a place for all who wander." In the evenings, Callum taught the local children how to write. Tala taught them to cook and hunt. Awana planted corn and taught her children how to greet the sun each morning with an old Apache prayer. By the fire, Callum read them stories of the West, while the two towering women sat nearby, mending clothes and laughing. One evening, as the sunset bathed the valley in gold, Callum wrote the last line in his old journal. I once thought strength meant knowing how to fight, but now I understand strength is when a man dares to love, even when the world calls him weak. As the years passed, the House of the Wind became something rare on the border between two worlds. White folks, Apache, wanderers, the lost all could find shelter there, a hot meal, a cup of water, and a roof for the night. The mixed children grew up strong, speaking both languages, singing both songs. When they ran through the cornfields, the wind would rise in circles, kicking golden dust into the air, carrying their laughter across the prairie. Tala watched them and said to Awana, "We have kept the most precious thing of the Apache." Awana asked, "Our blood?" Tala shook her head, smiling. "No, our kindness." And as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Callum stepped onto the porch, holding the old silver bracelet. He lifted it into the wind and smiled. Because he knew where there is kindness, the wind will always return. In a land of dust and judgment, where the wind once carried both fear and silence, a few people chose to live another way. They planted kindness like corn, not knowing if the rain would come next season. Callum, Tala, and Awana proved that kindness does not need to defeat anyone. It only needs to leave no one behind. In a world of guns and storms, they chose gentle hands to rebuild trust. And sometimes, that quiet kindness is the strongest thing left in the Wild West. In the end, I simply wish you peace and happiness. I love you all from your friend in Wild West Storytelling. Tell me what you felt about this story in the comments below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed it, and do not forget to subscribe for more dramatic tales from the Wild West. That afternoon, the desert wind burned like fire. Elias Kane rode his horse across the barren land, a place that had once been the front line between white settlers and the Apache. The grass was scorched and brittle, the sky a dull yellow, and the horizon was swallowed by dust. From a distance, he spotted an old cottonwood tree, its trunk blackened, as if it had witnessed too much death. Beneath its shade, 2 bodies hung upside down. Long black hair dangled low, blood dripping onto the sand. A wooden sign swayed in the wind, with words burned in charcoal. "Savages shall not be forgiven." Elias stopped his horse. The silence pressed in, suffocating. One of the 2 girls was still conscious, her dark eyes barely open, her voice rough and strained. "Do not cut the rope. They are still around." The dry wind carried the smell of blood and gunpowder. Elias looked around. Not a soul in sight, only the cries of crows echoing from the hilltop. He let out a quiet sigh, drew a rusty knife from his belt, and sliced through the first rope. The heavy thud of a body hitting the ground tightened something in his chest. He cut the second rope. The other body fell, blood seeping red into the sand. The 2 girls gasped for air, trembling under the harsh Sunday. Elias knelt down, placed a hand gently on their shoulders, and said softly, "It is all right now. No one is going to hang you again." Above them, the cottonwood swayed in the wind, and in that moment, the West chose someone to stand against itself. Elias lifted the 2 Apache girls onto his horse, then rode off through the land scorched with fire and stone. The day was drawing to a close. The sun sank behind the western mountains, glowing red like thinned blood. He did not know whether he was saving them or dragging them deeper into death. All he knew was leaving them behind in the desert would be no different than killing 2 more souls. The old rest stop once used by Mexican traders was hidden deep in the rock canyon. Its wooden door was rotting, the roof leaked, but the fireplace still stood, along with a few tattered blankets. Elias laid the girls down on the floor and brought them water. The younger one, Ciala, remained unconscious. Her lips were cracked, and her neck was marked with deep purple rope burns. Her older sister, Nahara, opened her eyes and stared at him, her dark gaze sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but firm. "Elias Kane. I live north of the valley. You should not have stopped." "I know." They both fell silent. Only the crackling fire and their heavy breaths remained. Elias took an old cloth and gently wiped the blood from her neck. Nahara said nothing, but her eyes never left him, watching every move like a wild animal on alert. That night, as he stepped outside to gather more wood, torchlight flashed near the base of the hill. The sound of hooves. Shouts rang out, "Where are they? Search every inch. Bring me those two squaws, or I will hang every damn one of you in their place." Elias stepped back inside and whispered, "They are hunting you. How many people want you dead?" Nahara clenched her fists, her strong shoulders trembling. "It is not death they want. It is silence. My sister saw something she should not have seen." Ciala groaned softly. Elias knelt beside her, laying a hand on her forehead. She was burning up with fever, her breath scalding hot. He looked at Nahara. "If we stay here, they will find us. I have a horse, and I know the old path through the ravine. I will take you both. You owe us nothing." Elias looked her straight in the eyes, his voice low and rough. "No. But I owe myself one time where I did not turn away." Nahara said nothing. She gave him a slight nod. Outside, the wind howled through the rocks, carrying the ashes of years of hatred. That night, as the fire in the hearth slowly died, Elias kept watch over the two strangers, a warrior and a child who had not yet grown. He knew from this moment on, the entire land would see him as a traitor, and the wanted posters would soon carry the name Elias Kane. The desert night was thick as ink. A crescent moon hung suspended above, casting silver light onto the jagged rocks. Two horses galloped wildly along a narrow path heading south. Wind whipped dust and dried blood into Elias's face. Behind them, the glow of red torches grew steadily brighter. Cavalrymen in pursuit, no more than a mile away. Ciala clung tightly to Nahara's back, struggling to keep her balance. Every dip in the trail drew a soft groan from her. Elias glanced back and said in a low voice, "Hold on tight. Once we clear the canyon, we can lose the trail." Nahara gritted her teeth. "They will not give up easily. 2 soldiers are dead because of the commander's son. He needs blood to bury the rumors." Elias tightened the reins. The wind lashed his face with biting cold. "What rumors?" "That he violated my sister, and other women too, then destroyed them to keep it quiet. Now he wants us all gone to erase the truth." Nahara's voice cracked, but her eyes stayed hard as steel in the moonlight. A gunshot rang out behind them. A bullet sparked off a rock, sending fragments flying. Elias pulled his gun from the holster and fired back. His shots were crisp, controlled, echoing off the cliffs like thunder swallowed by the dark. A rider fell, followed by a scream, then silence. "Do not stop," Elias barked. Nahara nodded, leaning forward and spurring her horse. Her body pushed ahead, shoulders taut beneath the moon's pale glow. Dust twisted behind them like smoke from a battlefield. When the last torchlight faded, Elias led them into a sand-filled ravine. He had once taken this route, while trading salt, narrow and winding. They stopped beneath a natural stone arch, panting for breath. Ciala coughed violently, her trembling hand clutching Elias's shirt. Why did you save us?" Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, looked at the young girl, and replied, his voice rough, "Because no one deserves to be hung like an animal." Nahara turned away, silent. After a long pause, she spoke softly, almost too low for anyone but the wind to hear. "It is the first time I have heard a white man say that." In the distance, the first thunder of the season rolled through the sky, followed by a misting rain. Lightning split the mountaintop, revealing 3 shadowy figures, a wanted man and 2 women marked by fate. The first rainstorm fell hard, washing away hoofprints, blurring the line between the hunter and the hunted. The third night in the desert, the moon hung high, red like a wound that refused to heal. Wind swept in from the west, carrying the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and the distant sound of hooves fading into the dark. Elias thought they had escaped, but gunfire suddenly cracked through the night like thunder. A bullet tore straight into his shoulder. The impact threw Elias from his horse, sending him crashing into the cold sand. Blood sprayed in a long, jagged line. "Elias!" Ciala screamed. Nahara turned her horse around and charged back. In the blood-red moonlight, she looked like a giant warrior. She dragged him into a crevice, where the shadows were thick as tar. The blood kept flowing. Elias gasped for air, his hand shaking as he clutched his gun. "Go. They will catch up. I will only slow you down." Nahara threw her knife into the sand and glared at him. "Shut your mouth. If you are not dead, you do not get to talk like you are." She tore a strip from her shirt and pressed it hard against the wound. His blood soaked her hands, hot and thick. Ciala knelt beside them, tears mixing with sweat. "Sister." "He is losing too much blood." Nahara clenched her teeth, tying the cloth tightly around his shoulder. "Do you hear me? My name is Nahara, Wind of the Mountaintop, and this is my sister, Ciala, Song of the Sand. We Apache do not bow, and we do not leave our own behind." Elias gave a faint smile, his breath fading. "You two are crazy. You will die staying here." Nahara looked him straight in the eyes, her voice low and steady. "I will not leave you behind. We will stay with you, always." Another gunshot rang out. A rock above their heads shattered. Ciala gently pushed Elias down, whispering, "If you die, I die too." Her words melted into the sound of the season's first rain, cold drops falling onto warm blood. The three of them lay still in the dark, listening to their hearts beating in rhythm with the wind. The moon faded behind the curtain of rain, leaving behind the scent of smoke, blood, and damp earth, the scent of those who had not yet chosen between life and death. Elias opened his eyes one last time before slipping into unconsciousness. In a flash of lightning, he saw Nahara kneeling beside him, her dark eyes glowing like embers. Ciala sat close, head bowed, singing a soft melody the wind carried away, a song for the fallen who still refused to let go of his gun. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of days long past red dust at dusk, the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together once more. And I will tell you another tale from the west. The sun rose slowly, like someone waking from a nightmare. The sand glowed pale gold, but the scent of gunpowder still lingered in the wind. Elias opened his eyes. The world before him was a blur of ash gray, and each breath stabbed like fire near his left shoulder. He lay in a hollow among the rocks. Nearby, Nahara was building a fire from dry cactus branches, her every movement sharp and deliberate, as if she had never known exhaustion. Ciala sat close, stitching up his shirt with a half-burned thread, each crooked needle stroke done with surprising care. Elias stirred. A low groan escaped his throat. Nahara looked up and said curtly, "Do not move. The bullet is out, but the blood is still fresh." He gave a faint smile, voice hoarse. "I thought I was dead," she replied without taking her eyes off the fire. Dead men do not complain. Outside, the light filtered through the stone crevice, falling on the three of them. Ciala looked at him, her eyes softening. "You slept for 2 days. We thought you would not wake." Elias looked at the two girls and spoke slowly. "You should have left me behind." Nahara shot him a cold glance. "Do not talk nonsense. Even if it costs our lives, we would never leave the man who saved ours." He fell silent. In the flickering firelight, Elias noticed Nahara's hands tanned and calloused from bowstrings and blades, and yet those same hands had kept him alive through 2 nights of storm and blood. As the sun climbed higher, wind swept through the canyon, carrying the scent of dried blood and damp earth. Ciala began to sing soft, clear, like a thin wisp of smoke. The wind does not kneel, but it sings for those who fall. Nahara lifted her head and looked out, toward where the sky was brightening. "They have posted your bounty at every outpost. $200 for the head of Elias Kane. They will not stop." Elias chuckled under his breath, his eyes tired but brighter than ever. "Then we go. Whichever road no one dares take, we will take that one." Nahara stared at him for a long moment, and in her eyes, for the first time, there was something other than suspicion, trust. She nodded slightly. "Then we go. The wind will lead us. 3 people, 3 fates, 3 souls with nothing left to fear." They rose and stepped out of the hollow where the last embers had just gone cold. Ahead of them, the dawn of the hunted had just begun. That afternoon, the wind rose with fury. The whole valley seemed to vanish into heat and dust. Elias led the horse up front, his shoulder tightly wrapped in a black cloth, the blood long dried into a dark stain. Nahara and Ciala followed close behind, gripping the reins, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Before them lay the Rio Bravo, the river that marked the border between the land of law and the land of ghosts. Its waters ran red and fast. On the bank, old hoofprints were still visible. Every fugitive had reached this point, but few had ever crossed. Nahara stared at the current and said softly, "Once we cross, there is no going back." Elias answered, voice low, "There is nothing left to go back to." He stepped into the river first. The freezing water gripped his legs, the current so fierce that each step demanded every ounce of strength. Nahara followed, her powerful frame carrying Ciala on her back. The smaller girl clung to her sister's shoulders, whispering, "I am scared. Do not be. The wind on the other side will be different." Midway through the river, gunfire cracked. Bullets tore into the water around them, sending up silver sprays. Elias turned and shouted, "Get down." A bullet sliced past his hat, the wind hissing by his ear. He clenched his jaw and pushed his horse harder. Nahara, one arm holding Ciala, the other gripping the short knife at her waist, swam forward with powerful strokes. Moonlight gleamed on her shoulders, the reflection of steel flashing in the river like a streak of fate. At the center of the current, Elias faltered. He lost his footing and went under. "Elias!" Ciala screamed. Nahara did not think, did not hesitate. She let go of the reins and plunged after him. Wrapping her arm across his chest, she heaved him up, every muscle straining against the freezing pull of the river. On the far bank, Ciala fell to her knees, her tears mixing with rain as she cried out, voice hoarse, "Do not leave him. We have not yet reached the place where the wind blows." At last, all three of them washed up on the southern shore, drenched, gasping, as if they had just been born again. Ciala knelt down, her trembling hands clutching Elias's hand. "You made it. The wind did not take you." Elias breathed raggedly, closed his fingers around hers, and looked out toward the distant sky, where Mexico burned red in the sunset. "From now on, no one calls you savages. No one." Nahara looked at him, rain and sweat running down her face, and said quietly, "No white man has ever said that." The three of them sat in silence by the riverbank, where the waters churned toward the endless beyond. Behind them was America, and a bounty of $200. Ahead of them was Mexico, a land that asked no questions about the past. Their first summer beyond the border arrived with long rains and the scent of fresh earth. Three people, starting over with nothing but their bare hands. Elias chopped driftwood into beams, raised posts, and hammered together a roof. Nahara hunted rabbits and dried their meat. Ciala tilled the soil and planted corn along the riverbank. Day by day, their sweat sank into the earth. And in silence, a house took shape, rough, uneven, but steady. Just like the three who built it. One afternoon, Elias pulled the old wooden sign from a cloth bag, the same one worn by wind and time, still bearing the burned words, "Savages shall not be forgiven." He stared at it for a long moment, then hung it upside down on the wall. Nahara asked, "Why hang that?" Elias replied, "So the wind can do what people never could." From that day forward, the sign swung gently in the breeze, its charred words slowly fading, until pale streaks remained like the sky itself was correcting the earth's mistake. One early autumn day, a Mexican trader stopped by the house, asking for water. He brought news from the north. The commander and his son, the ones who once hung the two sisters from a tree, had been arrested by the government. Charges: murdering civilians, embezzling rations, treason. The news spread along the border like the first kind wind of the season. After hearing it, Elias simply bowed his head, his voice low. "The wind has done its part." Ciala stood on the porch, clutching her skirt, tears falling without knowing if they came from joy or sorrow. Nahara said nothing for a long time, then finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "No revenge is needed. Mother Earth has chosen her way." That evening, they went back to their work. Elias framed a new doorway. Nahara wove cords to tie the roof, and Ciala baked the season's first corn cakes. Smoke curled from the chimney, and golden light spilled across the wooden walls, glowing on their sun-worn, peaceful faces. As the sun set, the upside-down sign trembled in the wind, its words nearly gone. Elias looked at it and smiled gently. "That is enough. Even the past knows when to be quiet." Night fell. The breeze drifted in through the doorway, carrying mist from the river. The three of them sat on the porch, listening to the crickets hum in rhythm with their hearts. No one spoke of vengeance anymore, only of the cradle soon to fill the home, and the corn nearly ready for harvest. Years passed. The Rio Bravo still flowed, but the wooden house by the river had changed, bigger, brighter, filled with laughter. Elias now had gray in his hair. His hands were still rough and calloused, always fixing fences or mending the porch. Nahara, strong and quiet, tended the horses and taught the children how to shoot a bow and hunt. Ciala, gentle and small, watched over the hearth and raised abandoned children who had wandered in from the border. People called the place the House of the Wind because there, no one asked about your skin, your blood, or your past. Any soul who came was welcomed, given food, water, and a roof to sleep under. Children with red skin, white skin, brown skin ran around the yard, chasing chickens. Some called Elias grandfather. Some called Nahara Big Mama. And everyone called Ciala Sister Song. In the evenings, the golden sunset stretched across the river. Elias sat on the wooden steps, watching smoke curl into the sky. Laughter echoed all around him. On the porch wall, the old wooden sign still hung upside down. The word "savages shall not be forgiven" had faded, leaving only faint burn marks. He looked at it and said softly, "The wind has erased it all." Nahara sat by the window, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "No one forgets, Elias, but forgiveness does not mean forgetting." Elias nodded and smiled gently. "Yes, because the wind still blows, but it does not bow." When night came, Ciala sang lullabies to the children in Apache. The wind comes from the mountains. It passes through blood and ash. The wind does not kneel, because it carries those who have fallen. Nahara stood by the door, listening to her sister's voice drift into the night air. She remembered the night they were hung from the cottonwood tree, the scent of blood, the crows, the wooden sign, and the quiet man who cut the rope. She whispered, as if speaking to the earth itself, "We are free now, and free from hate." The moon rose, silver across the river. Elias turned off the lamp, locked the door, and looked back at the house full of warmth and laughter. In the dark, a breeze from the northern bank touched the old wooden sign, making it sway gently, as if it were a greeting from old spirits long gone. In a land once soaked in vengeance, there now stood a place where the wind sang of kindness, and those who were once hung from a tree were now teaching children how to plant seeds, how to forgive, and how to lift their faces toward the Sunday. My friend, some people do not need fame, nor even to be remembered. They simply choose to do what is right. Elias, Nahara, and Ciala did not win with guns. They won with kindness. They did not take lives, but their mercy was what forced justice to finally act. In the burned-out desert, compassion is the rare water that keeps the soul alive. And if ever you find yourself feeling alone in this world, remember, the wind never kneels, and kindness always finds a way to pass through. Thank you so much for being here with me, dear friend of Wild West storytelling. I truly hope you find peace and happiness wherever you are. I love you all. Let me know what you thought about this story. Leave your comments down below. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. On a wooden post in the middle of the sand, Nyola, the tall, muscular, sun-browned Apache woman, was hung by a rough rope. Her wrists were torn, dried blood clung all the way down her arms. The men had left since morning, leaving her under this burning sky as a lesson for anyone who dared to resist them. She tried to lift her head. Her deep black eyes, like coal, were carved with silent pain. Her breathing broke into pieces. Her hoarse voice pushed out words. "Please, end it." When the sun sank behind the far ridge, a man appeared. Elias Ward, the lonely rancher who lived several miles away, rode his horse along the same old trail he had avoided for 10 years, the place where his wife had died during labor. He saw the Apache girl hanging still in the wind, like the shadow of a nightmare he had been carrying. Elias stopped his horse and cut the rope with his knife. The rope snapped. Nyola's heavy body collapsed into his arms. Her breathing was faint. Her eyes were still open, looking at him as if asking why she deserved to be saved. The desert wind roared, kicking up sand and blood dust. In the fading twilight, a man bent down, lifted the sunny darkened body, and whispered, "You are safe now." That was the beginning, where fragile life met mercy in a dead desert. Elias Ward took Naola back along the silent narrow trail under a pale ash-colored moon. She lay motionless in front of the saddle, her breathing flickering, and the dried blood on her wrists had turned dark. He wrapped her in an old wool blanket, the one that had once belonged to his wife. Every hoofstep crushed the dry sand, the way someone crushes memories that were buried too deep. When he reached the old cabin, Elias stopped for a long time. It had been 10 years since he last returned here. The wooden walls were faded. The porch beams were broken, and the window was still half closed, just like the day he walked away after his wife's funeral. Now, inside this rotten house, there was the faint breathing of a stranger. A breath that dragged him back to the thing he had been avoiding. Life. Elias carried Naola and placed her on the old bed. Her shoulders were heavy like soaked timber. Her bronze sunburned skin was dark under the oil lamp. He washed her wounds with clean water, then bandaged them with cloth torn from his own shirt. When she woke up, she flinched. Her black eyes, deep as an abyss, reflected the flickering lamp. "You can have me, if you want." Her voice was hoarse and trembling. It was no longer an invitation. It felt like instinct for survival. Elias stopped what he was doing. His eyes dimmed and he gently shook his head. "You do not have to pay me." Those words were soft as breath, yet heavy like a vow. He poured water, handed it to her, and added, "Just rest. You are safe here." She drank in slow sips. Water spilled from the corners of her lips and fell onto the wound, still stained with blood. The yellow lamplight washed over Elias's calloused hands and over the face of the Apache woman who still could not believe she was alive. He lit the fire. Wood smoke filled the cabin, mixing with resin and old memories. On the wall, their shadows stretched long. One was a man who had been dead on the inside, and the other was a woman who just escaped death. That night, Elias sat guard on the porch, his rifle resting near his foot, listening to the fragile breathing behind the wooden door. Above them, clouds gathered, signaling that rain was coming. He lifted his head, speaking to himself in a choked voice as soft as wind. Maybe this house needed a heartbeat again. A gust of wind swept across the roof, carrying the sound of the horse breathing and the smell of wet earth. A man and an Apache woman. Neither of them knew that on this night, fate had returned, beginning to weave a thread of salvation that neither of them would have the strength to cut ever again. On the first morning after the rain, sunlight pierced through the old porch roof, spilling across Naola's sleeping face. Her skin was sunny darkened, her broad shoulders wrapped in a wool blanket, and her wounds still marked red. Elias sat at the table, brewing coffee in a kettle with a broken handle. The sound of boiling water blended with the horses outside the first sign of life in a house that had known only silence for 10 years. When she woke, he simply said, "You should eat something." She looked around, her voice hoarse and small. "Am I really alive?" Elias nodded without looking up. "You are alive, and you are safe here." In the days that followed, she tried to walk around the ranch. Though still in pain, Naola found ways to help feeding the horses, gathering firewood, clearing the yard. Elias did not stop her. He just quietly watched. He spoke little. She almost never smiled. But every evening, as they lit the fire together, their eyes grew less like strangers. One afternoon, Naola asked hesitantly, "Why did you save me?" "Your people, they hate us." Elias set his cup down and looked out at the gray sky. "I did not save you because of who you are. I saved you because if I walked away, I would be just like them." She stayed silent for a long time, then lowered her head. That sentence, like a small flame, warmed the part of her heart that had burned black. That evening, she quietly stepped out onto the porch, where he was mending the saddle straps. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and kitchen smoke. "Elias," she said softly. He looked up. "What is it?" "I do not know how to thank you, but thank you for not touching me." Elias looked at her, his eyes kind and deep. "I did not save you to take anything. I just wanted someone to keep breathing." Naola looked at him for a long while, then turned away, tears silently falling down her sun-worn cheeks. That night, for the first time, she slept in peace, no longer haunted by the rope. Inside the old cabin, the sound of wind mixed with the breathing of two people who had once lost everything. There was no need to say more. In their silence, they both understood a new heartbeat had started in the house that had once been abandoned to the wild wind. 2 weeks later, Niola was strong enough to ride again. Elias took her into town to buy salt, nails, and a few pieces of cloth. The townsfolk stopped talking as soon as they walked into the store. Their eyes were wary, and whispers drifted like dust in the wind. An Apache. With a white man. Niola quietly picked out supplies, her head slightly bowed. Elias stood behind her, silent as stone. Suddenly, heavy boots struck the wooden floor, followed by a sneering voice behind them. I knew it. This savage girl is still alive. Brent Coulter, the man who once strung her up to a post, stepped out from the crowd. His shirt was stained with liquor, his eyes bloodshot. He pointed at the cloth bag in Niola's arms. She stole. I saw her hide salt in her skirt. The store buzzed with murmurs. The shopkeeper hesitated, glancing over at Elias. Brent stepped forward, raising his hand to slap Niola. Elias grabbed his wrist midair. His voice was low and cold. Touch her again, and I will bury you with the same rope you used to hang others. No one dared to breathe. Brent tried to yank free, but Elias's grip was iron. His eyes no longer looked kind. They belonged to someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. She is a demon. She kills, Brent shouted. Elias let go, shoving him hard to the wooden floor. He spoke every word clearly. No, she is human, and you are a coward. The air inside the store turned heavy as lead. The shopkeeper lowered his head and muttered, I did not see her steal anything. Brent stood up, his face burning red, then stormed out under the cold stares of the townspeople. Niola trembled, still clutching the cloth bag tightly. Elias rested a hand on her shoulder and said softly, Come on, we do not have to prove anything to them. On the ride home, she said nothing. Only the sound of hooves and wind echoed across the golden hills. At last, she whispered, her voice tight with emotion, No one has ever stood up for me like that. Elias answered, eyes gazing into the distance. I did not stand up for you. I just did what a person is supposed to do. The desert wind rose, sweeping dust across the distant horizon. But in the hearts of those two souls, something had begun to glow, a faint light, yet stronger than the scorn of the entire world. The belief that kindness still had a place in this harsh land. Thank you so much for being here. If this story reminded you of days long past of red dust afternoons and the sound of horse hooves echoing in your heart, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together once more, and I'll share with you another story from the West. That night, wind howled across the dry fields. The oil lamp inside the cabin flickered, casting the shadows of two people on the wooden wall. Elias sat sharpening a small knife, while Niola stitched up her torn deerskin shirt. They said nothing, only the soft crackling of firewood filled the room, warm and still. But outside, in the thick darkness, came the heavy sound of hooves stopping just beyond the hill. Elias looked up. He could hear it clearly. Now the rough breath of drunk men, the sharp clicks of guns being cocked. He blew out the lamp and gave a signal with his eyes. Niola understood instantly. She rose quietly and reached for the axe by the fireplace. The window shattered. A man burst in, yelling, Let's see if you can still protect her now, Ward. Brent Coulter. His eyes were blazing red. He held a pistol, and behind him stood another man with his face covered. Elias stepped back, his voice low and solid as stone. Leave now, Brent. I warned you. I lost everything because of that savage. Tonight, I take it back. The gun fired a shot, clipped the roof. Niola hurled the axe, the steel blade slamming into the doorframe, sending the masked man stumbling back in panic. Elias charged. He knocked the pistol away and tackled Brent to the floor. They wrestled fiercely, bodies crashing, wood splintering, blood spilling. Brent tried to break free, but Elias was stronger. He pinned him down, twisting Brent's arm to the floor, voice gritty. You once hung her up. Now it's your turn. He pulled a rope from the shelf, bound Brent's wrists tight, and dragged him onto the porch. The masked accomplice galloped off toward the hills, his horse's hooves fading into the wind. The sheriff from Red Rock arrived just as dawn broke. Elias handed Brent over without saying much. When the lawman asked what had happened, Elias simply replied, "He tried to kill us. I was protecting my home." The sheriff nodded, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes, then motioned for his men to take Brent away. As the wagon disappeared into the distance, Elias turned back toward the cabin. Naola stood on the porch, hair tangled, axe still in hand. He looked at her and let out a long breath. "It's over. It's all over now." Her voice came quiet and trembling. "No, Elias. Not until you forgive yourself." Her words pierced through the thick silence inside him like a blade. He said nothing, just gave a small nod, then walked back inside with her into the house, where the fire had begun to warm even the parts of their souls that once seemed lost forever. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear after the night's rain. A thin mist covered the valley, and the sound of a horse neighing echoed from the wooden stable behind the house. Elias stood on the porch, watching the sun rise behind the mountains. He had not slept. All night, Naola's words echoed in his mind. "Not until you forgive yourself." When Naola stepped outside, her hair tied back and wearing his old wool sweater, she saw Elias already holding the reins. "Where are you going?" she asked. Elias turned, his eyes still and quiet as a lake. "To a place I once swore I would never return." They rode the entire morning. The path was dusty and silent. When they reached the familiar hillside, Naola noticed a small, nearly collapsed cabin standing alone in a field of dry grass. Elias dismounted and walked slowly to the door. He gave it a gentle push, and the hinges groaned. Inside, all that remained were an old bed, a child's cradle covered in dust, and a faded cloth draped over a wooden chair. Elias reached out and touched it. His hand trembled. His voice came rough and low. 10 years ago, my wife died here giving birth. I could not do anything. I buried her just behind this house, then left and never looked back." Naola stayed silent. Elias went on. "I thought I was living. But the truth is, I was only hiding. Every time the wind passed through the door, it sounded like her voice calling me." He turned to her, eyes wet, and for one rare moment, truly vulnerable. "The night I cut you down, I saw myself again, hanging between life and death, between guilt and forgiveness." Naola stepped closer and laid her sun-tanned hand over his. "I understand," she said softly. "They tied me up, but you've been tying yourself all this time." Elias gabia quiet, ashen smile. "Maybe it is time to stop running from ghosts." She nodded. "Then let us stop together." They walked behind the house, to where a small grave lay beneath an old oak tree. Elias knelt down and pulled the weeds from around the wooden marker. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of soil and wildflowers through the air. He whispered like a prayer, "I am home, Mary. And this time, I am not leaving." As he stood, he felt Naola's hand gently tighten around his. There was no need for more words in her deep black eyes. He saw the peace he had not been able to find for so many years. They stood there for a long time, until the sunlight touched the roof of the cabin, and the last of the ghosts vanished in the glow of the morning light. In the days that followed, Elias and Naola began to rebuild the cabin. The small house that was once a burial ground for memories had become the start of something new. Elias chopped wood and repaired the doorframe, while Naola mixed clay to patch the cracks in the walls. Every hammer strike, every fresh coat of paint echoed like the rhythm of a heartbeat coming back to life. In the mornings, they worked under the golden sun, their sweat blending with sawdust and the scent of fresh wood. Naola had grown stronger. Her shoulders were solid and steady. She laughed for the first time when Elias clumsily dropped an entire bucket of paint onto the ground. "You are definitely not good with your hands," she teased. Elias replied, his voice rough but warm. "I am better with reins than with a hammer." They both laughed, the sound ringing through the dry fields like a new wind. In the afternoons, they planted vegetables behind the cabin. Elias showed her how to lay out the rows, and Naola patiently followed his lead. Her fingers were caked in soil, but her eyes burned bright like fire. "In my tribe," she said, "when a woman plants something, it means she believes in tomorrow." Elias looked at her for a long time before answering softly, "Then let us keep planting for tomorrow." At night, they sat together on the porch, listening to the chirping of crickets and the distant murmur of a stream. Elias lit a fire and poured black coffee, handing a cup to her. I used to think I was old, with nothing left to do but wait to die. Naola smiled gently, the firelight dancing across her sunny-worn face. Old? In my tribe, a man with calloused hands and a heart that still loves that is a real man. He said nothing, his eyes resting on her hands, rough, strong, and yet somehow tender in a way that caught him off guard. The next morning they finished painting the door, built a new fence, and hung a bundle of dried flowers by the porch. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb of the past. It had become a place of laughter, of hammering and horses, and the smell of firewood smoke. As Naola washed her hands in a basin, Elias stood nearby, watching how the sunlight lit up her back, solid, grounded, and gentle like the earth after rain. He whispered, almost to himself, "This house has never looked more beautiful." Naola looked up and smiled, because for the first time, someone truly lives in it. That afternoon, as the wind swept over the roof and the wind chimes rang softly, Elias lifted his eyes to the crimson sky. He knew the past would always be there, but for the first time, it no longer frightened him. That autumn came earlier than usual. The first winds of the season carried the scent of dry grass and the soft rustling of falling leaves around the cabin. In the sunlit valley, the old house now glowed as if it had learned to breathe again. On the porch, pumpkin vines were blooming, and the new fence stood strong like the shoulders of the two people who called this place home. Naola was tending the fire, its light flickering across her sunny darkened face. She wore the deerskin dress now carefully mended, her hair tied back, and her strong hands moved with a grace that seemed to defy their strength. Elias stepped in, carrying an armful of firewood, bringing with him the smell of wind and a rare smile. "It is getting cold. We are going to need more wood." She turned, the corners of her deep black eyes lifting. "And a storyteller. You promised to tell me about the Red River country." Elias chuckled softly, setting the firewood down. "I once went there with my late wife, but today I would rather tell a different story. One about an Apache woman who taught me how to live again." Naola paused, her lips trembling slightly. She said nothing, just stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest where his heart beat slow and steady. "And I," she whispered, "want to tell the story of the man who saw me when the whole world turned away." They sat by the fire late into the night. Outside, dew fell gently on the rooftop, each drop glistening in the moonlight. Elias looked at her, his voice rough yet full of warmth. "You know, Naola, I used to think no one could come back after running for so many years. But maybe people only really return when there's someone waiting for them." She smiled a smile that lit the room more brightly than the fire itself. "And now, you have come back." The next morning, they led the horses out into the field. The sunlight spilled across the valley, shining on the faces of two people who had once been broken. Elias hammered a small sign into the ground at the gate. "Ward Ranch, a home for the lost." Naola looked at the sign, her gaze softening. "Those who are lost will find their way, just like we did." Elias nodded, his voice low. "Now you see it, Naola. You are no longer just a shadow in the wind." She laughed, her eyes gleaming. "And you are no longer the man just walking around with a dead soul." The wind swept through her long black hair, carrying the scent of wood smoke and laughter into the still air. The little cabin stood in the golden field like a scar that had finally healed, rough, but real. From that hopeless cry beneath a noose to the final smile beneath a new roof, they had completed the full circle of fate. And that barren land, at last, had learned what warmth and mercy felt like. My friend, sometimes, courage is not about drawing a gun in the middle of a storm. It is about returning to the place that once made you numb with pain. Elias did just that. He came back to the house where his memories were buried, faced the wounds head on, and chose to forgive. And Naola, she did not just survive. She chose to believe in people again. Among ashes and scars, they found the one thing that can heal all loss: love. A love that does not erase the past, but makes you strong enough to walk forward and smile at the sunrise. Thank you for being here with me, dear friends of Wild West storytelling. I hope wherever you are, peace and happiness stay close by your side. Thank you so much. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 8 if this story spoke to you. and do not forget to subscribe so you never miss another dramatic tale from the Wild West. In the middle of the square, 3 tall Apache women were tied to 3 upright wooden posts under the blazing afternoon sunday. Their bodies were solid, as if carved from bronze, broad shoulders, muscular arms, and sun-darkened skin covered in bruises. Villagers stood around them, shouting, "The demons have returned. They carry the curse of the Red Mountains." A man holding a torch stepped forward, his hand trembling, but his eyes burning with hatred. Then a gunshot rang out, shaking the entire square. The torch dropped and went out in the sand. From the porch of the saloon, Jack Harlan stepped out slowly, silver hair, weathered leather coat, Winchester rifle in hand. His eyes were cold, his voice gravelly. "Let them go. If there is any curse here, it is your cowardice." Silence fell over the crowd. The wind kicked up dust. Jack walked forward and drew a knife to cut the ropes. The first woman dropped heavily, like a felled tree. She tried to push herself up, her deep black eyes looking at him. Not with hatred, only exhaustion. He cut the other 2 free. With every slice of the blade, a sharp snap echoed in the heart of a man who had lost his wife and child to the flames long ago. When the 3 large bodies collapsed onto the sand, Jack let out a long breath. The wind blew through Dust Hollow, carrying ash, dust, and the beginning of a truth no one had dared to speak of for 20 years. Night rain poured down as if trying to wash away every trace of blood and dust. Jack Harlan's wooden cabin stood isolated at the edge of town, where wild grass reached up to the knees and the sound of wolves howling mingled with thunder and lightning. He lit a fire in the stove, the dim yellow glow casting light over the 3 massive bodies lying stretched out on the floor. The 3 Apache women, Nahara, Ciala, and Tomaya, were still unconscious. On their shoulders, backs, and wrists were deep purple welts from the ropes. Jack took off his coat, tore it into strips, and cleaned their wounds using the bitter liquor he usually kept to help him sleep. The scent of blood, sweat, and smoke mixed into a heavy, metallic odor. After a while, the largest of the 3, Nahara, stirred faintly. Her thick eyelids lifted, and her gaze, sharp as a blade, reflected the firelight. She spoke in broken English, her voice hoarse. "The fire. It was not from the gods. It was from men." Jack paused, turned to look at her. "You remember?" She did not answer. She simply closed her eyes again, breathing hard, sweat pouring as if she had just escaped a burning dream. By midnight, as the wind howled through the cracks in the door, a faint moan came from the corner of the room. It was Ciala, the youngest. Her eyes still shut, lips trembling. "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." Jack froze, thinking she was talking in her sleep. He gently pulled the blanket over her and let out a quiet sigh. War and torture, he thought. Some wounds run so deep, even dreams do not dare to touch them. He sat by the door looking out into the rain. In the sound of the wind, he saw again the face of his wife and the darkened hands of his young son. Both had died in the mine fire 20 years ago, the same fire the villagers called the fire curse, though he had always called it the cowardice of men. Nahara opened her eyes again, her voice rough. "Why did you help us?" Jack replied slowly, without turning around. "Because no one ever saved my wife and son. Maybe I owe God one saved soul." She looked at him for a long moment, as if she understood everything he did not say. The wind picked up, and the fire in the stove flickered, casting its glow on the strong forms of the 3 women, the ones who had once been hung for a curse that never existed. Outside, Dust Hollow was as silent as a graveyard, but inside that small wooden cabin, the fire still burned, steady, gentle, like the spirits of 3 women being brought back to life. And in that soft golden light, Jack Harlan's weathered face seemed to hold something he had lost for 2 decades. The belief that, sometimes, fire can also save. The next morning, Dust Hollow was once again drenched in sunlight. But in that sunlight, there was something suffocating, like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible. Word spread faster than the wind. Old Man Harland is hiding 3 Apache witches in his house. In front of the saloon, a few men whispered, their faces flushed with whiskey and fear. They are going to summon a rain of blood. I saw it myself. One of them has the eyes of the devil. Within just a few hours, the crowd had gathered armed with guns and torches heading toward the cabin where Jack had lived alone for 20 years. Inside, Nahara sat sharpening a short blade, the flash of steel flickering in the shadows. Ciala and Tomaya watched through the window, their eyes tense. Jack calmly lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the air like morning mist. Said quietly, "They will come." Nahara looked up. "Are you afraid?" Jack answered, his voice dry as old timber. "I am, but fear does not mean we have to run." Shouts echoed in the distance, mixed with the sound of horses and crackling torches. Jack stepped out onto the porch, Winchester slung over his shoulder, his eyes cold and clear. The crowd stopped 10 paces away. A bearded man shouted, "You are hiding demons in there. Let them out." Jack exhaled smoke, staring directly at him. 20 years ago, you said the same thing, and my wife and son burned alive in the mine because of your words." The man faltered. Someone in the crowd looked down in shame. Jack continued, his voice low and steady. "You never buried the truth. You only buried your fear. If you want to burn 3 more innocent people, go ahead and shoot. But make sure you do not miss, because I will not stand still." A dry wind swept through, kicking up clouds of dust. The first torch flickered out, then the second, and the third followed. A horse neighed loudly. A flock of crows burst into the air from the graveyard behind town. A strong gust of wind blew through, scattering old mud, stained newspapers' headlines reading "Fire Curse of Dust Hollow." The crowd slowly began to retreat. No one dared look back. Jack watched them go, slowly resting the rifle on his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the eyes of a man who had survived too many fears to still believe in devils. Inside, Nyada asked softly, "Will they come back?" Jack replied, "Not today. The wind has chosen a side." Then he closed the door, leaving the howling wind outside, carrying with it the rumors, the fear, and the lies, all slowly dissolving into dust. Inside the old wooden cabin, only the fire remained flickering across 3 sun-darkened faces, 3 souls just saved from execution, and a man who had finally found a reason to stand up to an entire town. 3 days later, the sky over Dust Hollow turned gray, as if covered in ash. Jack Harland and the 3 Apache women rode deep into the western mountains, the place where, long ago, a mine had been buried in the blaze known as the Fire Curse. The trail was rough, rocks crunching under the horses' hooves. A faint scent of sulfur still lingered in the earth, like a wound that had never healed. They stopped in front of a crooked cabin nestled between stone ridges. A thin stream of smoke rose from a bent chimney. A thin man with long silver hair stood at the door, his eyes sunken like coal pits. Silas Crow. Jack spoke first, his voice low. "We came looking for truth, not trouble." Silas looked at the 3 tall women behind him. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, an old hurt, like seeing ghosts from the past. Silently, he invited them in. Inside the old shaft, a flickering oil lamp cast shadows across a worn leather journal lying on a cracked wooden table. Jack opened it. Page after page filled with faded writing, smudged with dark fingerprints of coal. August 14. There was no curse. Just cheap dynamite and greed. The mine owner wanted more yield, ignored warnings about weak tunnels. People needed a demon to blame. They chose the Apache tribe. And they chose fire as proof. Jack gripped the journal, his hand trembling slightly. He remembered the night the mine collapsed, his wife screaming in the smoke, his young son trapped beneath a beam. For 20 years, he believed fate had cursed him. Now he knew it was not fate, it was man. Nahara spoke softly. "I heard stories like this, but I never believed them. Now I know. The real curse is the lie." Silas sat down, poured corn whiskey into a clay cup, his voice rough as dry soil. "I was the one holding the detonator that day. I knew the truth. But if I spoke, I would be killed. So I stayed quiet. 20 years of silence, and I can still hear the screams." He looked straight at Jack. "You think saving these 3 women will cleanse the past?" Jack replied slowly, eyes fixed on the lamp. "No. But at least I will not die one more time in silence." Silas sighed, his gaze heavy. "Truth does not save anyone. It just keeps you awake at night." Then he closed the journal and slid it across the table toward them. The lamplight flickered, casting its glow on sun-worn faces strong and tired. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain cliffs like the cries of ghosts still wandering beneath the earth. But this time, the wind carried no scent of sulfur, only the scent of truth, dragged up from the damp, heavy depths, and real enough to hurt. "I am deeply grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back old memories, those dusty afternoons, the echo of horse hooves beating in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another tale from the West." That night, they camped beside a dry creek bed. The sky was full of stars, but the wind carried a dry heat, like the breath of ashes from a mountain long since gone cold. Jack lit the fire, its glow casting flickering light across the faces of 4 people, 3 Apache women with sun, darkened muscles and sharp black eyes, and an old man whose heartache had long since carved itself into the lines on his weathered face. Nahara sat in silence, holding a silver necklace etched with the shape of an eagle, the only thing left from her mother, who had died in the dust mine fire. The silver caught the firelight, and to Jack, it looked like his own memories were being reflected back at him. He asked softly, "How long have you kept it?" 20 rainy seasons," Nahara answered, her voice low. "My mother said, when the fire lights up again inside someone's heart, throw it away. Is it time now?" She nodded. No one said another word. Nahara stood, her bare shoulders broad and powerful like bronze sculpture. She stepped toward the fire, clutching the silver necklace in her hand. The wind picked up. She murmured something in Apache, an ancient prayer only the wind would understand. Then she tossed the necklace into the flames. A flash of silver shot upward, bright and brief, then vanished like a falling star. Ciala bowed her head. Tomaya placed a hand over her chest and whispered, "There's nothing left to be afraid of." Jack stared into the fire now whirling with silver sparks, ash rising and circling around them. The scent of burning silver mixed with wood smoke and damp earth. For a moment, he felt as if Dust Hollow itself had started to breathe again. From a distance, Silas Crow stood watching. He did not step into the light, only observed. The fire reflected in his old, deep, and lonely eyes. He spoke quietly, his voice carried on the wind. "Maybe. I have waited 20 years to see fire lit the right way." Then he turned and walked away, his silhouette fading into the night like a shadow of the past, finally willing to let go. Nahara knelt, her large hand gathering the silver ash. She let it fall through her fingers, smiling softly. "My mother said fire knows when to forgive. Now it does." Jack looked at her and said slowly, "Maybe. Fire was never to blame. Maybe people just lit it the wrong way." The wind swept stronger, lifting glowing embers high into the night sky. The 4 of them sat still, the fire shrinking low, leaving behind only warmth and the gentle flicker of light. In that silence, they did not know those drifting silver ashes had carried away the curse that had bound Dust Hollow for 20 long years. Dawn poured over the mountains like honey flowing across stone. After the night of fire, no one said much. They packed up camp in silence, saddled the horses, their eyes carrying the weight of people who had just crossed into another life. The wind carried the scent of fresh ash, the smell of things that had burned away but still left warmth behind. On the road back, they passed through a dry field once the edge of the old mine. The earth was still cracked, black like charred coal, but between those cracks, the first green blades of grass had begun to rise. Jack pulled his horse to a stop, looked down, and smiled softly. "Even the land knows how to forgive," Nahara replied, her voice low. "The land forgives. People do not." That evening, they returned to the small wooden house where Jack had lived alone for 20 years. He walked into the stable and unlocked a stall that had been closed for a long, long time. Inside stood a large black horse, tangled mane, bright eyes still, and silent like a statue. Jack reached out, stroked its neck, and spoke gently, almost to a spirit. "Do you remember, Shadow? It has been 20 years. And I have not ridden you once." The 3 Apache women stood just outside the door. Nahara stepped forward, her hand resting on his shoulder, broad, warm, and solid like mountain rock. "Who did you keep it for?" Jack looked out into the empty space where the sunrise had just faded and answered slowly, "For my son. He died in the mine collapse. He was 16. I promised him I would teach him to ride this horse, but he never made it to the saddle. A quiet pause. The wind passed through, jingling the reins. Then Nahara said, "Teach me. If you can teach an Apache woman to ride a white man's horse, maybe your son's soul will finally be free." Jack looked at her tall, sun-darkened eyes as deep as red earth and nodded. That afternoon, the four of them led the horse out into the field. Jack showed Nahara how to hold the reins, how to feel the horse's breath through her knees. Each time she lost balance, he would murmur, "Do not try to control it. Just let it move. As long as you keep looking ahead." Siala and Tomaya sat on the fence, watching, sometimes laughing when Nahara tumbled into the grass. She would get up, wipe the sweat from her face, and smile, a flash of steel beneath the Sunday. By sunset, Nahara finally held her balance. The black horse galloped in circles across the field, dust flying, her leather jacket soaked in sweat and streaked with dirt. Jack stood in the middle, watching, his eyes lit with something that had been dark for 2 decades. When Nahara came to a stop, he said, voice thick with emotion, "You did it. If my son were alive, he would be laughing just like I am right now." Nahara stepped down and walked to him, speaking softly. "You taught me how to ride. But what you really taught me was to stop being afraid of falling." That night, they sat together around the fire. Siala played a bamboo flute, the soft notes echoing like lullabies from the mountains. Tomaya lay back, staring at the stars, and said, "Maybe our spirit never left. Maybe they were just waiting for someone brave enough to light the fire at the right time." Jack smiled faintly, the firelight dancing in his tired eyes. "You have already lit it." Outside, the night wind blew past the porch, carrying the distant sound of a horse's whinny. The house, once a refuge for a broken man, now echoed with laughter, with fire, with the voices of women telling stories about land, about blood, and about belief. And in that sound, the old soul of Dust Hollow seemed to begin learning how to breathe again like true survivors. 3 days later, the valley wind grew gentler. The sky was so clear you could see the veins of light etched across the clouds. Dust Hollow, after 20 years of living in fear, fell into a different kind of silence, not the lurking kind, but one that listened. Jack Harland led his horse out from the stable, the saddle newly mended by Nahara's hands. The 3 Apache women, Nahara, Siala, and Tomaya, stood waiting at the scorched clearing that once marked the edge of the mine disaster. They wore new leather dresses, still rough, still weathered but catching the sunlight in a bronze-like glow. They looked like statues carved from the desert itself, fierce, beautiful, and solemn. Jack mounted his horse, his eyes sweeping across the land that had once burned his life to the ground. Black rocks, deep pits, all now covered in a soft green moss. He said quietly, "I used to think this place only knew how to take. But now I see. It gives back too. If you know how to live right." Nahara replied, her voice deep and warm. "The land does not hold a grudge. Only people do." They rode across the dry grassland, where the wind carried both the scent of dust and the promise of new grass. Siala lifted her head and smiled faintly. "We will tell Apache children that once, a white man stood alone before a crowd to save 3 women from the noose." Jack turned to her, smiling softly. "And I will tell the children of Dust Hollow that 3 women walked out of fire and taught an old man how to believe in people again." Tomaya raised her face to the wind, her black hair lifting in the breeze. "If any child asks what a curse is, we will say it is when people choose to believe fear over truth." Jack nodded, his eyes lit beneath the sunlight. His gaze no longer held pain, only the rare peace of someone who had finally laid down his burden. The wind rose again, scattering old ash around them. In that breeze, the 3 women held their heads high, and the old man watched them in silence, feeling something strange. In them, he saw the shapes of his wife, his son, and the part of himself he had thought was lost forever. At the last hilltop, they came to a stop. Nahara looked to the horizon, where the sky met the land in a silver line. "From now on, we are no longer the hanged. We are the ones who hold the wind." Jack nodded. "And I am just the one the wind chose to forgive." The 4 of them looked down toward the valley where the old wooden posts had fallen, erased by time and wind. And in that moment they knew, None of them were victims anymore. They had become the ones who carried light through fire. That morning, the dawn rose slow, golden and gentle like the earth taking a fresh breath. After a long night, Dust Hollow no longer smelled of smoke or fear, only of wet grass and cold wind. The wooden rooftops, damp with morning dew, caught the first rays of sunlight, and the old chapel bell rang faintly, as if waking from a 20-year sleep. On the dusty main road, Jack Harland rode out in front, his faded coat fluttering in the breeze. Behind him, the three Apache women, Nahara, Ciala, and Tomaya, rode side by side, tall, strong, and steady. Children peeked from behind doorways, their eyes curious more than afraid. An old woman whispered, "They are not demons, they are survivors." Jack stopped his horse at the square, the very place where he had once fired his rifle to save them. The old wooden post was still there, now just a broken, rotting stump. He dismounted and slowly pressed the last stake into the earth. On it, he placed a small piece of silver, the final ash from Nahara's necklace. Nahara knelt beside him, her large, sun-worn hand covering his old one. "The fire is at rest now," she said softly. Jack replied, "No, it just moved. Now it burns in us." They stood there for a long time, until the wind began to rise. Silver ash from the necklace swirled into the air, glittering in the morning sun, then faded, drifting toward the red horizon. It looked like 1,000 tiny stars, small, but carrying the forgiveness Dust Hollow had waited 2 decades for. Ciala took Tomaya's hand and smiled. "They will say we carried the fire away from here." Tomaya answered, eyes lifted to the sky. "No, fire never belonged to anyone. It only comes to those brave enough to keep warm, not to burn." Jack looked at the three of them, 3 powerful figures, warriors, and the beautiful scars of this land. He spoke, his voice thick, but warm. "If there is another life after this one, I hope I get to be the father of women like you." Nahara turned to him, smiling gently. "You already are, Jack Harland. We just came a little late." They rode out of the square just as the sun crested over the hills. Light shone through the horses' manes, through rising dust, through the 3 figures carved like bronze. In the wind, the chapel bell rang again for the first time in 20 years, not because of fear, but because of peace. And at the edge of Dust Hollow, where old ashes met new light, people said, when the 3 Apache women rode past, the fire beneath the ground finally stopped growling, and the wind began to sing. "My friend, kindness does not turn back time, but it does stop old wounds from bleeding. In a land once scorched by fear and hate, even a single act of saving someone can change the wind, can turn old ash into light. Kindness is not about forgetting the past, it is about facing it without fear, because sometimes it is the smallest flame of compassion that can heal a broken heart and help an entire town remember how to believe in life again." Thank you so much for being here with me, dear audience of Wild West storytelling. I truly hope you are safe and well wherever you are, whatever you are going through. I love you all. Let me know how this story made you feel. Drop a comment down below. Type 1 if this story spoke to you, and do not forget to subscribe for more powerful tales from the Wild West. Silas Hawkins bought an abandoned cabin for $50, nestled in a valley no one dared to set foot in. Folks said the place was haunted by Native American spirits wandering in the night, with cries echoing across the mountainside whenever the moon turned full. Silas did not believe in ghosts. He believed in silence, the silence of the wind, of the earth, and of a man too weary to be afraid. His only companion was Ash, a 9-year-old silver-coated hunting dog, loyal and gruff, just like his master. On that first night, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. The stove was cold, and the fireplace still held the ashes of long-extinguished flames. Silas lit a fire, its glow casting flickering shadows on the soot-stained walls. Suddenly, Ash began to growl, then lunged toward the hearth, clawing furiously at the lowest stone. "Easy now, Ash," Silas said hoarsely, but the dog kept barking madly, as if it had caught the scent of something buried deep. Silas knelt down and brushed away the ash and rubble. A metallic clang rang out, metal striking metal. Beneath a thick layer of dust, Silas pulled out a rusted tin box, its lock corroded, and the corner etched with the letters EB. He sat still for a long while, watching the firelight dance across the cold metal. In a place feared for its ghosts, He had just uncovered the first secret left behind by the living. The next morning, the fog was so thick it turned the entire range of hills into a sea of white. Silas sat at the old wooden table, a knife in his hand prying at the tin box's lock. There was a soft click, then the lid sprang open. Inside lay a dark leather journal, heavy and stiff, as if it had been soaked in water for a long time. On the first page, a trembling line of writing read, "Edward Blake, reporter for the Helena Daily Chronicle, June 1855. 15 years ago, the writer had vanished, and that name had since become a whispered curse throughout the Bitterroot." Silas turned the pages, the ink smudged but still legible jagged lines full of despair. Silverbow Mining Company poured mercury into the headwater streams. Countless settlers and Apache people died. Fish died by the thousands. They told the people the spirits of their ancestors were angry, that the land was cursed, to scare them into leaving. Then they bought the land for pennies, like thieves. Silas sat still, his hands trembling as they gripped the page. Each word felt like a knife twisting in his chest. They hanged the village chief to silence him. I could not escape. If anyone finds this, tell the world Bitterroot has no ghosts. Only sins buried beneath the stone. Outside, the wind howled through the chimney. Ashes whispered in the air, like voices of the dead. Silas closed the journal and took a deep breath. In the fireplace, the flames flickered, reflecting in his eyes long familiar with death, now lit by something else, resolve. He knew he held evidence that could blow open the secrets of this entire land. But he also knew that doing so meant digging up his own grave. Ash let out a low bark, stepping in front of the door. On the distant hillside, 2 riders appeared, dark cloaks, black horses, and a flash of steel at their sides. Silas blew out the oil lamp, cradled the journal, and stepped back behind the wooden wall. Through the crack in the door, he saw them pause in front of the cabin, glance around, then turn away as if confirming something. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of tobacco and fresh saddle leather, the kind of smell only mine men carried. Silas narrowed his eyes. He knew that from the moment he opened that tin box, he was no longer just a recluse. He had stepped into the final battle of his life, not for land, not for glory, but for the truth buried beneath cold ash. Outside, the sun was rising behind the mountains. The first light of Bitterroot fell on the leather journal resting on the table. The final page opened, with trembling handwriting. "If I die, I want my soul to hear the stream run clean again," Silas whispered, as if making a vow. "You will hear it again, Edward, I swear." 3 days later, Silas rode out of the Bitterroot Valley. In his saddlebag, wrapped tightly in oilcloth, was Edward Blake's journal. Ash ran alongside him, his shadow stretched long across the pale gray earth. The road to Helena was long and cold. Snow-covered mountains stood like gray walls cutting across the horizon. By sunset, the town shimmered in golden mist, once a promise of justice, now echoing only with the sounds of metal and whiskey. Silas walked into the office of Sheriff Merritt, a man who had once fought beside him in Virginia. Now he wore a new coat, had grown thicker around the waist, and his eyes were cold as ice. "Been a long time, Hawkins," Merritt said with a thin smile. "I figured you died out there somewhere in the field." Silas placed the journal on the desk, his voice gravelly. "This has enough evidence to open a full investigation. Silverbow Mining murdered people, poisoned the streams, made up ghost stories. You need to read it." Merritt flipped through a few pages, then closed the book quickly, his breathing heavy. "You don't understand, Silas. Some things are better left buried." Silas looked him dead in the eye. "I've buried enough men in the war. I'm not burying the truth." That afternoon, rumors spread fast. The crazy old rancher had brought something back from Bitterroot to Helena. By nightfall, Silas was summoned to the Dusty Bell Saloon, the place where all the town's dirty deals were made. In the far corner sat Jonathan Blackwell, owner of Silverbow Mine. The man wore a black leather coat trimmed in silver, a glass of dark, blood-red liquor in his hand. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, voice slick as oil, "I hear you found an old journal. I'm here to help you. Forget about it." Blackwell placed a heavy bag of gold on the table. "This gold is enough for you to leave the state, buy new land, and live the rest of your life in peace." Silas looked at the bag, then back at the man. "I carried gold in my saddle all through the war, but I've never felt it weigh this much." He pushed the bag back, eyes hard as steel. "I sell cattle, not my soul." The saloon fell silent. The clink of a glass. The soft thud of a closing door. Then nothing but the wind hissing through the frosted windows. Blackwell said nothing more. He gave a slight nod to Merritt, a nod Silas understood too well. That night, as he left town, Ash howled into the darkness. On a distant ridge, a small flame flickered, then vanished. Silas knew. They had caught the scent of the truth, and now, only blood would silence them. He turned his horse and rode back to Bitterroot where the storm was waiting. 3 days later, the wind came crashing down from the mountains like a wild beast. The Bitterroot sky was torn apart by snow and thunder. The entire valley was buried in white, with only the black smoke from Silas Hawkins' chimney rising quietly against the storm. He bolted the cabin door, stoked the fire, and checked his gun, an old Winchester, still loaded with 12 rounds. On the table, Edward Blake's leather journal lay beneath the oil lamp, its pages fluttering gently to the sound of the wind. Ash lay pressed close to his master's feet, ears perked. The old dog had weathered many winters, but this wind made him tremble. That night, Silas barely slept. He knew Helena had turned against him, and Blackwell would not let things rest. Men who could buy the law could also buy the death of a lone rancher. Around midnight, hoofbeats rang out through the storm. 1 horse, then 2, then 3. Ash growled low. Silas doused the lamp and crouched behind the door. Through the wooden slats, he saw shadowy figures pouring oil around the cabin. "Bastards," he muttered, gripping his Colt tighter. The flames rose fast, like snakes on the run. A window burst. Ash sprang out, clamping down on the wrist of the man holding the torch, blood spraying red across the snow. Another fired 3 shots, one grazed the roof, the other slammed into the wood frame. Silas flung the door open and fired. The Winchester cracked through the wind, and the second man dropped, his body sinking into the snow like a burning log. 3 figures remained, circling the cabin. "Tough old bastard, huh, Hawkins?" A raspy voice yelled through the storm. Silas replied, voice dry as dust. "I died in the war. You're just talking to a ghost." A bullet zipped past his ear, knocking his hat into the flames. Smoke and wind swirled together, turning the cabin into a blazing torch. Ash let out a long howl, then lunged at the third man, dragging him down into the snow. Silas fired his last shot. The bullet sliced through firelight and buried itself in the chest of the man with the Colt. When the wind swept through, silence remained. The cabin burned violently, ashes spiraling into the sky. Silas held Ash close, the dog's blood soaking through his coat. In the distance, torches flickered, more of them, getting closer. He dragged the dog into the stable, whispering, "Hang on, old friend. It's not time yet." Above them, the black sky thundered like war drums. Silas turned back, hand resting on the trigger. Amid the white snow, he stood alone, a lone figure in a sea of fire and human sin. All of Bitterroot seemed to roar, bearing witness to the final battle of the man who guarded the truth. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of red-dusted afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit together once more. And I'll tell you another tale from the Wild West. The wind calmed as dawn approached. Only the scent of smoke, wet ash, and the labored breathing of an old dog remained. Silas Hawkins sat slumped against the stone wall, eyes half closed, the Winchester still resting on his lap. Outside, the glow of the burning cabin reflected off the snow, painting the Bitterroot Valley red like an open wound. Ash lay close beside him, his shoulder trembling in intervals. Silas tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around the dog's wound, whispering, "You are not leaving yet, you hear? I still owe you, old friend." In the distance, hoofbeats echoed slow at first, then quicker. Silas squinted through the thick mist. 5 riders were making their way down the hillside. He calmly reloaded his rifle, counting the beat of his heart between dry trigger pulls. Blackwell's men, he thought. This time, they are not here to burn a house, they are here to bury a man. The wind shifted. A flash of light crossed the sky. Silas looked up. A gray pigeon was flying through the mist, heading north. The only bird he had kept after the war, trained to carry messages. And tied to its leg, in a small leather tube, was a note addressed to Captain Mark Harlan, his old comrade at Fort Missoula. "Bitterroot has been poisoned. I have proof. If you do not see me after dawn, come for the journal. S.H." Silas watched the bird disappear into the snowstorm. Now, all he had to do was hold out until 6 o'clock in the morning, the hour the cavalry changed guard at Fort Missoula, and when Harlan would read the message. The hoofbeats drew closer. 4 gunmen appeared in front of the cabin, weapons already drawn. "Come out, Hawkins. We do not shoot dogs, just stubborn men," the leader shouted. Silas spat, voice rough and dry. "Well then, you found the right man." Gunfire erupted. Shots cracked through the valley like the drums of hell. Ash lunged, barking wildly, causing 2 of them to miss. Silas fired back. His first shot slammed into the chest of the man with the torch, sending him crumpling into the snow. The remaining 2 pulled back toward the hill, firing and cursing as they ran. The sky turned silver gray. 5:59. Silas loaded his final round, blood dripping from his arm. He did not retreat. He stepped out from the burning cabin, his shadow long across the snow. From the distance came the sound of a cavalry bugle, hooves thundering. "They are here," he whispered. 6 o'clock in the morning. The Fort Missoula cavalry stormed down the hill, their rifles cracking like thunder. Blackwell and his men were struck down in the muddy snow. Sheriff Merritt stood frozen, watching Silas through the smoke, then bowed his head. "You were right, Hawkins. I was wrong." Silas said nothing. He only looked toward the distant stream where the first light of the new day flowed through the mist. Bitterroot had been cleansed, not just with water, but with the blood of those who dared to stand tall in the face of darkness. 3 weeks later, the snow began to melt. The first spring in Bitterroot after the storm of blood. Silas Hawkins leaned on his spade by the stream, watching the crystal-clear water reflect the pale blue sky. Every time the sunlight touched the surface, he remembered his promise, so that the souls of the dead could hear the stream run clean again. News of the clash spread throughout the town. The Helena Daily Chronicle ran its first article in 15 years. "Crimes beneath Bitterroot Valley. Silver Bow mining poisons the land, murders innocents, and fabricates ghost stories to seize silver mines." Edward Blake's journal became the key evidence in what would become the biggest trial the West had seen. 10 judges, 18 journalists, 3 mine owners, and even Sheriff Merritt were brought in to testify. In the Helena courthouse, Silas said little. He simply placed the leather journal on the witness table and looked straight at Blackwell, who sat in handcuffs. "Do you believe in ghosts, Blackwell?" he asked quietly. The man lowered his head, saying nothing. But no one in that courtroom dared to laugh. 3 months later, Silver Bow mining was dissolved. All its assets were seized, the mines sealed off. The new administration sent crews to cleanse the stream, every rock, every branch washed with water and ash. The Apache people returned. They pitched their tents, lit sacred fires, and offered smoke from sage to the water. An old Apache man shook Silas's hand, his eyes cloudy like morning mist. "The water sings again. You are not a ghost. You are a man who keeps his word." But in Silas's heart, there was no joy in victory. All he felt was the emptiness of a man who had survived a feeling he once carried home from war, now returned again. That night, he sat alone on the porch, bottle empty, pipe burned out. Ash lay beside him, breathing heavy, his silver coat shivering gently in the breeze. Silas leaned down and whispered, "We did it, old friend. No one's calling Bitterroot haunted anymore." From afar, the laughter of Apache children echoed by the stream. Their voices blended with the sound of water like an old song being sung again. Silas looked out across the field, where the ashes of his old cabin now bloomed with fresh green grass. He knew he would stay not for the past, but because this land had been reborn, and he would not leave it again. As night fell, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light across the newly built wooden walls. Ash shifted, resting his head on his master's knee, silver eyes closing in peace. Silas stroked him gently, voice low and steady like the wind. "You can rest now, old friend. The stream is clean, and so are the souls of men." Outside, Bitterroot kept breathing calm, pure, as if it had never known the sins of man. That summer, warm winds swept through the Bitterroot Valley. Green grass lined both banks of the stream, where the old cabin's ashes once lay. Silas Hawkins stood on the blackened earth, hammer in hand, eyes fixed on the lone stone chimney still rising from the field. The ashes still carried the faint scent of smoke, but he did not let it settle in his heart. With calloused hands, he drove the first post into the new ground. Each nail struck with slow, steady rhythm. The sharp thump of his hammer echoed with the birdsong and the flowing stream, like the heartbeat of a land being reborn. Ash lay under the shade of a nearby tree, older now, weaker. But his silver eyes never left his master's every move. Each time Silas looked up, he found that gaze waiting steady, trusting. "We're starting over," he whispered. The old dog wagged his tail softly, then lay his head down, like a guardian keeping watch over the valley's sleep. Day after day, Silas rebuilt the cabin with wood he cut and hauled himself. The local Apache came to help, bringing lumber, stones, and food. A little native girl, black-haired and bright-eyed, handed him a bundle of wildflowers and said in broken English, "The streamkeeper needs a new home." Silas smiled. It was the first time in many years he felt the trust of others. When the roof was finished, he lit the first fire in the new hearth. Smoke curled gently into the orange-red sky of sunset. Silas stood by the chimney, watching the old ashes rise and blend into the new smoke like two souls reunited after years of wandering. That night, a soft rain fell on the wooden roof. He sat by the fire, hands stroking Ash's head. The flames danced across both their aging faces, but in that glow, something had changed peace, a feeling Silas had never known. "We've come a long way, old friend," he murmured. "From the battlefield to here, from blood to water. And now I understand a man can't outrun the past. He can only learn to live with it." Outside, the stream sang with the wind. On the table, Edward Blake's leather journal still rested, no longer a record of guilt, but a reminder of a truth redeemed. Silas looked out the window and saw dawn arriving earlier than usual. Light shimmered on the stream's surface, shining through the newly framed window, casting its glow across his face. Ash stirred, nudged his head into his master's hand, then drifted off into sleep. And in that light, Silas understood. Ashes are not the end. They are soil where the seeds of trust can grow again. 1 year later, spring came early, and the bitter root flowed gently, a shining ribbon of glass winding through the valley. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and young grass. New homes had sprung up along the stream, with kitchen smoke curling into the morning mist. People now called this place by a simple name: the Valley of the Forgiven. Silas Hawkins wore his beard long, tall and lean. Pipe in hand, his old leather hat weathered at the brim. He was no longer a wandering drifter now. He was the keeper of Bitterroot, the one both native and settler alike came to when they sought peace, or a fair word. The new cabin stood firm, warm, and solid. Above the hearth, Edward Blake's leather journal hung framed on the wooden wall, not as evidence, but as a reminder. Once truth is lit, it does not go dark again. In the mornings, Apache children ran laughing around the porch, tossing stones into the stream. Silas sat on the steps, watching them play, eyes gentle but distant. Ash, now very old, lay beside him, silver eyes clouded, blinking only when the breeze touched his fur. Silas stroked his head, speaking in a soft, raspy voice. "You kept your word, old friend. The stream is clean now, and so are the people." That afternoon, a cool wind blew. The Apache chief, an old man with gray hair and a face like carved stone, rode up on horseback, carrying a blanket of deep red and brown. He placed it over Silas's shoulders and said in slow, careful English, "From this day, you are of Bitterroot. When you are gone, the wind will remember your name." Silas said nothing. He only bowed his head. A single tear fell onto Ash's silver coat. As evening came, he walked down to the stream. The water shimmered in the sunset. In his hand was a small handful of ashes, what remained from the old hearth. From the night of the storm, he scattered them into the current, letting the river carry them away. The ashes dissolved, and the sunlight shattered into 1,000 tiny sparks like souls released into the sky. That night, the fire in the cabin burned gold. Silas sat by the stove, his hand resting on Ash's head, the old dog's breath slowing, soft as wind. "Sleep now, old friend," he whispered. "You have come far enough with me." Ash let out a faint sigh, then lay still. The cabin fell into quiet. Outside, Bitterroot slept in peace, the sound of the stream blending with the chirping of insects. A breeze passed through, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant firewood smoke. On the porch, the silhouette of the old rancher remained unmoving, carved into the night a symbol of a man once abandoned by the land, now kept and embraced by it. And in this land, the people still tell the tale. When dawn touches the Bitterroot stream, there is a man and a silver dog guarding it, not to protect the land, but to remind mankind that justice and compassion can still grow from ashes. In this harsh land, there are still those who stand tall even when their hands shake, even when they are alone, even when death waits ahead. They seek no glory, carry no title, only a quiet belief that truth cannot stay buried forever. Like Silas Hawkins, and like so many ordinary souls, they choose to face the fire, not bow to it. And in that moment, when a person stands among the ashes, justice becomes more than a word. It becomes a light that guides an entire land. It has been an honor to share this journey with you. I only hope you find happiness and peace wherever you are in this world. I love you all, my dear companions of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more.